My name is Mathieu Gorge. I'm the CEO and founder of VG Trust, which, despite my French name and French accent, is actually headquartered in Dublin 8, and with offices in New York for the last 4 or 5 years, London since last year, and we opened up in France in April, and it reminded me of why I don't live there. The red tape is absolutely atrocious, so apologies for those of you who've opened up an office there. I feel for you. So what I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to zoom in from cybercrime into credit card fraud very quickly, and then try and look at PCI and data protection to provide you with an insight as to why I believe that PCI DSS can actually add value to your overall security strategy. Now, PCI DSS, Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, that doesn't sound very appealing just after the coffee break, but hopefully you might get some tips as to how you can use PCI to not only comply with the credit card schemes requirements for security around credit card holder data, but also with data protection, ISO 27000 series, and so on. Just to give you a bit of background on myself, I've been living in Ireland for about 17 years. I started the company in 2003. I'm involved in a number of things. One of the things I did want to mention, other than my active participation with the ICTTF, is the Info Security Ireland, which is the body set up by Enterprise Ireland and 6 founding members, with a view to promoting Ireland Inc. as a center of excellence and expertise for security on the global scene. So we're very active trying to lobby the government here in Ireland to appoint a chief security officer or a spokesperson for the country, and also to make sure that various government departments don't get hacked and that employees don't lose their laptops on trains and stuff like that. Some of the other stuff that was very interesting for me this afternoon was listening to Pierluigi earlier on. I'm very involved with the Geneva Security Forum, which is all around critical infrastructure protection. Despite the fact that VG Trust is heavily involved in PCI, what keeps me up at night is not really credit card security, because believe it or not, there's a lot of very good security and good measures that you can put around credit card to secure it. It is critical infrastructure protection. And I don't mean to scare anyone, but Ireland doesn't actually fare too well with regards to CIP compared to other countries. And that's something that we need to address as a country and as an economy, because obviously we rely on foreign direct investment. So the last thing we want is some European headquarters of big US, French, German companies being victims of an attack that they can link back to poor security on our infrastructure, and then they'll all start going. That wouldn't be any good for anyone. So. With regards to VG Trust, what we do is we try and help organizations achieve and maintain compliance with legal and industry standards. So in Europe, it's primarily EU data protection, data retention. It's also PCI DSS. In the US, it's primarily PII, so state PII, federal regulation around PII, HIPAA. We do a lot of work around high-tech, FISMA, and also around NERC, which is the critical infrastructure protection. So we looked at all of those various frameworks, and in order to demystify them, we created yet another framework, which we call the 5 pillars of security. And the 5 pillars of security cover physical security, people security, data security, infrastructure security, which includes cloud and your extended network, like with bring your own device and so on, and then crisis management, which was covered earlier on with regards to what do you do when something goes wrong. We offer a suite of services and software. We've got a portfolio of 25 e-learning modules, computer-based training, 3 of which are on PCI. By the end of this year, we'll have about 1 million users on that. We also have an enterprise product to help organizations project manage their PCI solution from A to Z. That's more for like the big, large companies. And then we have an offering for mid-size organizations that have access to a portfolio of merchants, like an acquiring bank, a large chain of shops, maybe a trade federation, and so on. We mainly operate within the financial services, IT, banking area. We do a lot of work with the council itself, with ENISA, and there's just a few examples of our customers here. So I'm just going to go through the work we do with regards to PCI, the thought leadership work that we do here in Ireland, in Europe, and globally. And then I'm going to zoom in on the payments industry, the fraud within payments industry, and then trying to map that to data protection, ISO, and so on. You may be familiar with the studies that have been published by the likes of Cisco, by Tripwire, by HP, and so on PCI. They're all very, very good. They provide you with a lot of information. In fact, the Ponemon Institute was mentioned, I think, by David earlier on. Some very good information in there. My problem with it was that it's only dealing with the large customers. And if you look at the figures released by Ipso here in Ireland, there are about 75,000 merchants. Out of 75,000 merchants, there's probably only 100 that would be at level 2 or level 1, i.e. between 1 million, so up 1 million, between 1 million and 6 million transactions a year, and above 6 million transactions. So, and it's the same pretty much in every country, maybe not to the same extent, but 90% of merchants would be small merchants. So there was no survey or no LinkedIn group for them. So what we did is we created a PCI DSS group for small merchants. If you go onto LinkedIn, you're going to find about 45 different groups for PCI. Some are territory-based, some are focused on maybe hardware or payment acceptance or whatever, but none of them was focused on small merchants. So now there's one which is managed by VigiTrust. We're also doing a survey with Barclaycard and Visa Europe. It's only in the UK at the moment. We're actually looking for partners to do it elsewhere in Europe. And we basically asked small merchants to give us an idea of the top challenges they were facing with regards to PCI compliance. And I've been working in security for many, many years. I've been working in PCI for 6, 7 years now, and before that with the other schemes that were individual card schemes. And I always felt that small merchants didn't comply because A, they didn't have enough money, B, they didn't have the commitment from the top, and 3, they didn't understand the technology. I'm glad to admit, not maybe glad, not glad maybe, but I suppose I have no choice but to admit that I was wrong. The number one reason out of 10 was that they don't understand the standard. The second one was that they don't have the time. Cost was number 5. Issues with technology was number 7, and lack of commitment was number 9. So we're actually going to launch the official results of the survey at a press briefing, an analyst briefing in London on the 18th of October, and around the same date we'll be publishing a white paper with the results of the survey. If you join the PCI DSS LinkedIn group for small merchants, you'll get access to the results of the survey. So we spoke about fraud a good few times this morning and this afternoon. There's different types of fraud, not just credit card. I think it affects the whole payments and the whole banking ecosystem. So retail and personal banking, debit fraud, internal fraud, online fraud, payment fraud in general. SWIFT fraud is one that we don't talk about a lot, but it's still happening, where some people manage to hijack some SWIFT payments. Check fraud is still very big. And then I think that fraud is also getting personal. It's not just fraud against corporations. So expense fraud is actually on the rise. In a recession, I suppose it kind of makes sense. You know, people are looking for money where they can get it, so they'll put in an additional 10, 20 euros on every expense sheet that they send out. Who's going to know? And that's actually a big cost for large organizations. Phone fraud, I think, was very well covered by Adaptive Mobile and the others. ID theft was very well covered already. One area that I think we need to cover as a group of cybersecurity professionals is the issue of protected health information. So in the past, people would have gone directly for the money. What we're seeing now, and especially in the US, is people that are actually focusing on going towards information that they can blackmail you with. So they'll try and find out your your health status, and if there's anything that they can blackmail you about or anything you might be embarrassed about, they'll actually say, well, I'll give you back your health records if you give me some money. There's also new vectors and new targets for fraud. So I think Paul this morning spoke about social media. We do a lot of research around social media insecurity, as we call it. Social media is everywhere. It's on your mobile phone. It's on literally any type of device that you can communicate with. And I think that the security around social media is really not well managed at the moment. And I'll talk about social media again throughout the presentation. Multi-purpose mobile platforms. So now I can use my mobile phone as a payment device, either as a hardware payment device by plugging in something into my phone and I can swipe a card, or maybe as a virtual payment device. And that plays in with PCI as well. Prepaid fraud, again, is something we haven't really discussed today. There's a lot of prepaid cards. There is some fraud around acquiring prepaid payment mechanisms and then selling them on at a fraction of the price, and that is costing the industry. Contactless fraud is also something to watch at the moment. There's also generation-focused fraud. So, for instance, the younger people are definitely more at risk than before because of social media and so on. And again, we do a lot of work with schools in the UK, for instance, where we train young teachers not to befriend their pupils because they're just coming out of college and they're used to befriending everybody. And that, that's kind of a no-no. We also train young people not to trust everything they see on social media. It might sound like second nature to you, but it wouldn't to them. And then at the other end of the scale, you see older people that are just new to the internet and they just fall victim of very easy scams. And that's an issue as well that we need to look at. So what does that have to do with payment card industry, and how can PCI DSS help? So I just want to start with a definition that I took from the CyberSource report this year, which is always a very good report for finding out the state of fraud, online fraud, and fraud within payments. So they provided us with this very long definition that says payment security entails managing and securing payment data across an organization's full life cycle, from the point of payment acceptance through fraud management, fulfillment, customer service, funding, financial reconciliation, and transaction record storage. The presence of payment data at any of those points, whether on organization systems, networks, or visible to staff, exposes the organization to risks. So in reality, what that all means is that the presence of payment data exposes your organization to risk. So therefore, you need to fully understand your own ecosystem and your payments data flow. And I'm going to talk about ecosystem a lot. I just wanted to have a quick look at the life cycle of a credit card transaction, because there is a misconception in the market that if you're a merchant and you use a payment service provider that's compliant with PCI DSS, so in Ireland we are actually nearly oversubscribed with regards to payment service providers and payments gateway for the size of the country. In fact, most of which would be PCI compliant, and they take credit card security and compliance very seriously. But merchants tend to forget that the fact that you use a payment service provider in Kerry, for instance, that is compliant, does not make them compliant. It reduces the technical scope probably by about 80%. They still have to have a firewall, they still have to validate compliance, they still have to train their users, and they also still have to have policies and procedures. And if you look at the life cycle, it goes from a consumer to a merchant to a payment service provider, maybe somewhere in between there's some cloud provider that's acting as a third-party processor, and then it goes to the bank and then goes all the way back down. So at every hoop within that chain, there's a risk of fraud. In terms of PCI DSS, it's been a very busy time for PCI in the last 2 years. Even though the US remains the most compliant territory in terms of PCI, Europe is gaining traction. Jeremy King was appointed as European Director for the PCI Council 2 years ago, maybe nearly 2.5 years ago, and it's made a huge difference in Europe. We do a PCI DSS roadshow every year in Dublin, London, and Paris, and next year we'll extend it to Italy, Spain, Netherlands, and Germany. And we are seeing a lot of take-up on PCI. This year, in fact, we've been asked to provide a lot of training in Africa, Sub-Sahara, down as far as South Africa. And I think that as time goes by, we're going to go more east and east. PCI has a 3-year life cycle. And again, there is a misconception that PCI is the standard. There are actually 3 standards: PADSS, Payment Application DSS, PCI DSS, which is the one for merchants and service providers, and then PTS, which is the one for hardware, so either attended or unattended machines that take credit card payments. My major issue with PCI is that it is a technical standard. It goes back to the fact that the person that wrote it first is Troy Leach, the CTO of the council. But essentially, it's got 12 high-level requirements, 260 plus controls, 900 control points. The first control is have a firewall and maintain it. The last control is have a policy. Now, I don't know of any effective security standard that starts with have a firewall. Having said that, PCI remains effective to some extent, but we are lobbying so that in version 3, which will be due out in October 2010, we are actually going to have requirement 12 as requirement 1. Having said that, we've done some new guidance on tokenization, on wireless, on virtualization, on cloud, on mobile. We've got special interest groups that you can join if you're a participating organization. And, you know, they are trying to help. I think that this is also interesting in that the US is going chip and pin. But the fraud, the type of fraud around chip and pin or around skimming cards and so on in the US has actually gone up since that's happening. In terms of the controls, they're available in 2 different ways: through the risk-based approach, so i.e. requirement 1 to 12, or you can use your own risk matrix, or through the prioritized approach, which is kind of different milestones that have been kind of pre-packaged so that you don't actually start with the firewall, you start by encrypting the data and so on. But guess what? You still end up with policies. So policies is still last. 3 types of controls: technical, policies and procedures, user awareness, and training. And I believe you're going to talk next about the human aspect of security. It's very, very clear from PCI that humans remain the weakest link. The technology is there, the encryption is there, and so on. There are some controls that are recurring. There's a good white paper from Verizon that actually says that if you're at level 1 and you are to follow the rules and do all the daily, the weekly, the monthly, the quarterly, and the yearly tasks of PCI, you only have 2,607 tasks to complete. So it can be an undertaking, but it's not rocket science. In terms of required documentation, I'm going to show you an example of an ecosystem diagram in a minute, but how can you protect something you're not aware of? You need to be able to map it. When we go in and we do a pre-assessment, the first thing we ask for is an ecosystem diagram. And they look at the French party and they say, what? What does he want? You know, what's that? What's an ecosystem diagram? It is a diagram that shows you all your different silos so that you can map the data as it goes from one to another and from one network component to the other. Asset inventory, acceptable usage policy, firewall rules, business justification for rules. Why have a rule if you don't have a business requirement for you? Incident response plan, linking back to one of the previous presentations. And then at the bottom there, very important, management of third parties, which is requirement 12.8. How far down do you need to drill? Is it 1 level, 2 levels, 3 levels? So if you use a cloud provider, do they themselves use a managed service provider? You need to kind of know that. So the way we do this in VGTrust is we try and again, to use that word, demystify that process. Whether it's for PCI, for data protection, for SOX, for ISO, or whatever, there's 5 key things that you need to do. You need to educate people, starting at the top and then moving down to the factory floor, so to speak. Then you need to do a self-assessment, self-governed pre-assessment, maybe by using consultants, but something that you're in control of that's not officially assessed. That will give you a blueprint for remediation work. Then you can go into the actual corrective action at a technical level, whether it's for network and for hardware security or application security, which is very big at the moment. you do your policies and procedures, and maybe you have some specialized skills transfer. Like at the moment, we're seeing a lot of application security training, business continuity training, crisis management training, and so on. Then you're ready to get the official assessor or to do your self-assessment questionnaire. But the minute you've done that, you go back to square one, because it's an ongoing thing. It is about continuous compliance. So when I ask people for an ecosystem diagram, this is normally what they give me. And to some extent, I prefer to see that rather than a network diagram from 2007, which kind of irritates me to a large extent. An ecosystem diagram, you can do it the way you want, but it shows your different silos, your different security zones, and it actually demonstrates to a security professional that you are in control. And then you can map out the data, and you can have a little network diagram for every part of your network. So there's another thing that I wanted to mention, which is that word de-scoping. Anyone that tells you that you can de-scope for PCI, just don't listen to them. There is no such thing as de-scoping. You reduce the scope. The only way to de-scope for PCI is not to take credit card payments. So that's kind of, again, a myth in there. So you scope your ecosystem by looking at your perimeter, by looking at your cloud. By the way, the current guidance for PCI is that a mixed mode virtualized environment is not really recommended. So private cloud right now is really the only thing that they're pushing. There is a special interest group on cloud. I'm part of it. There's 120 different organizations on the cloud, on a conference call once a month. You can imagine how fast we work. But we are actually trying to provide some good guidance. Wireless networks. Again, you know, some of the major attacks that were mentioned earlier on started out with wireless. And then mobile devices, mobile payments, bring your own device, that all needs to be scoped. So again, your diagrams are key, and you need to map the flow between all of the different data. I'm going to go very quickly on that slide because Billy Hawkes covered everything this morning, so we're moving to a regulation rather than a directive. The right to be forgotten, I'm not sure how this is going to be implemented, but it is interesting. The controller's responsibilities, it's being really extended to the fact that you really need to have policies and procedures, you need to train your staff, and that's going to be checked a lot more than before. The idea of doing a data processing impact assessment if you handle some data that would present some specific risk to individuals, and that includes credit card holder data. And then data breach notification. I think the 24-hour rule is totally ludicrous, if you ask me, because there is absolutely no way that in the midst of a crisis you're going to say, well, what's the number of the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner? Where is it? Like, you're not going to do that. If you have a crisis, you're going to contain the crisis, you're going to investigate, you're going to take corrective action, you're going to document, you're going to try and eradicate the stuff. But maybe at the third step, you can contact them. I think that 24 hours is way too ambitious, especially bearing in mind that according to the Verizon data breach report, there's an average of 87 days between the time the breach occurs and the time the company realizes they've been breached. So that 24 hours is not really realistic. Data portability, again, I think that's interesting to look at. I don't know how this is going to be done, but it's a good idea. Then there's the idea of appointing a data protection officer. If you've got more than either full-time or temporary people, 250 people, you need to have that. So the intersection between the PCI and the DPA, there's a need for appropriate levels of security for both. The issue is that currently the Data Protection Act in Ireland states that you need to take what's known as appropriate security measures. So as Billy Hawkes said, it actually implies that you've done your own risk assessment. Not every organization has done that. But it would be true that compliance with PCI DSS should enable compliance with the key provisions of the Act. I just wanted to draw a comparison with the ICO in the UK. They've made an example of Lush Cosmetics a couple of years ago, saying that the breach should serve as a warning to all retailers that online security must be taken seriously and that PCI DSS or an equivalent must be followed at all times. Seen as there is no equivalent to PCI DSS, it's more or less making PCI DSS a requirement. So for online retailers, at least in the UK, PCI DSS is best practice. It is recommended. Billy Oakes spoke about it this morning. He had PCI DSS on his slides. So again, I think that speaks for itself. Other areas of overlap, under the new data protection laws, information security policies are really, really key. So start with the policy. If you start with PCI, start with requirement 12. Whatever you do, don't start with requirement 1. Protect the cardholder data, encrypt it. It's actually interesting that PCI DSS is asking you to encrypt data in transit over public networks, but not within your protected environment. So within the trusted environment, you can send credit card unencrypted, which makes absolutely no sense from a security perspective. Privacy by design speaks for itself. And again, I think it'll be interesting to see how we can implement the fines if Ireland actually follows suits on that. The right to be forgotten, I spoke about. The data portability, great idea. How you actually technically do that, I'm not sure. I spoke about those. Just want to zoom in very quickly on PCI DSS and HIPAA and PCI DSS and ISO. PCI DSS can be mapped to HIPAA very easily. We've done a mapping on HIPAA security and the security and administrative rules and PCI DSS. If you want to see that, just send us an email. There's a link there to some good mapping with ISO. If you want copies of the presentation, by the way, it's Mathieu, M-A-T-H-I-E-U, @vigitrust.com. But there are some common areas, differences. Having said that, it is true that using 27001 to achieve and maintain compliance with PCI DSS works. So in summary, I guess that the scope of PCI is very prescriptive, whereas ISO, you define your scope. The choice of controls is very wide with 27,000, whereas it's very prescriptive with PCI, which actually makes it a good standard to start with. Ongoing management of compliance status is very good with ISO, but it's not with PCI DSS, and that's one of the issues with the standard. I just want to essentially wrap up by talking about another aspect that you need to build into your risk management strategy, which is the idea of corporate culture. So you're going to have your values, your practices, your people, and your communication structure, but you need to understand that risk and privacy mean different things to different people. For me, privacy stops where I lose control over my data. And with regards to credit card holder data, the minute I swipe that data, I actually lose control over it. As I said, I'm not too worried about it because of PCI DSS and because of the protection I get from the likes of Visa and MasterCard. But in other stuff for like protected health information, it does worry me. I also wanted to talk very briefly about the generation gap. At the risk of sounding very old, again, I think that some of the people that are in college at the moment will be a major risk for us when they come into the office in 5 years' time, and we need to be prepared. We need to have the right security awareness training for them. So I'm running out of time, so I'm going to skip all of that because I more or less covered it. The summary is that, oops, sorry, I went actually too fast. If you look at corporate culture and risk management, you've got your corporate ecosystem that you've mapped with my diagram. You've got your values, you've got your existing risk management and safeguards. You end up with a residual risk surface, and that informs your risk management strategy, whether for PCI, ISO, or HIPAA. And in any event, I would recommend you use ISO as the main framework. So if you were to start with PCI, just to leave you with a few pointers, remember my 5 steps. Start with the education, go into a pre-assessment that's self-governed, do a remediation blueprint, take corrective action, then do the actual assessment, and get into continuous compliance. And it's always a mix of policies and procedures, technical solutions, user awareness. Your next steps would be to take that slide with the very minimum list of 13 policies that I gave you, see how you fare against that. Look at your technical solutions, make sure you use all of the functionality that's in it, do a pen test, and then make sure that you train everybody. So that's me. Ironically, despite my fears against social media, I'll leave you with my LinkedIn address. Feel free to connect, and thank you again to Paul and to the ICTTF for a great show. Thank you.